Hello everyone, and welcome to another one of my video diaries for my novel writing. Today is March 29th, 2014, and I have, this will be my fifth volume for this diary. And up until this point, I have written now 14,990 words for my novel, which means that I was actually kind of surprised by that number because it means that I've written 1,699 words this week, almost 1,700. And I actually thought that I hadn't written that many words this week because I felt very stalled, but I guess I did at some point. I don't know when. So it was a pretty good week. It wasn't as great as previous weeks, but it's much better than not writing anything at all, so I can't complain. So also, I just want to, before I launch into my discussion of my novel, I just want to mention that I received a couple of emails last week from people who've seen my videos, and I just want to say thank you very much for those responses. I really, really appreciated them. And for the people that I haven't emailed back, I'm sorry, I'm going to email you back probably today. I'm just a very, very busy person, unfortunately. And I want to give the responses the consideration that they deserve. And in general, they didn't really ask me any questions, which is fine. Sending me an email that's very lovely and personal is always appreciated. Except for, there was one thing that I really kind of wanted to draw out, and that was someone sent me an email, and they mentioned my genius is patience quote, and the person had she said she interpreted that in a very different way than I did, which is just simply that if you work very hard, you'll eventually become a very good writer. And I realized that my interpretation is a little self-aggrandizing. When she told me that, I was like, oh wait, maybe mine is like, maybe my interpretation shows how full of myself I am, because I was kind of seeing it more as you should just work hard and go in the direction you believe in, because then people will recognize you as being a genius. Now, obviously, I don't think of myself as like an actual genius, but I do think that both of those interpretations are true, and that you have to work hard because that's how you learn, and that's how you become a better writer in general. But I do also think that sometimes people may not always understand what you're doing, and you do have to have a little bit of belief in what you're doing and not always try to do the exact thing that everyone is expecting you to do. So in that sense, I do still kind of hold on to my original understanding of the quote, although I do now understand how it may have come off, and I apologize for that. But thank you again for the comments. I really appreciated them, and it was exciting because a couple of the people are writers themselves, and it's exciting talking to people who are writers and reading what their responses and concerns are. So thank you again, and as I said, previous ones, you can always email me in the email address that's in the description box of this video. Now, as I said earlier, I have had a bit of difficulty this week writing as many words as I wanted to, and I've hit probably one of my first bumps. I don't think it's a serious bump, but it is a bit of a bump. There was a couple of times where I didn't really write much, and I found myself just revising parts of what I've already written. And considering that I haven't completed a first draft, revising is really not helpful at this stage. It's more of a trying to get inspired move on my part. So part of the issue is that I'm arriving at a section of my current section. I'm on chapter 2, as I previously mentioned, and I haven't written very good notes for this part. Now, as I previously mentioned for my first chapter, I managed to write something even though I was kind of not writing what my plan had said. And now for part 2, I'm finding that even though I didn't really fill it out, I'm struggling to fill in what I can do next. And part of the issue here is that I usually work best when I'm kind of writing as if I'm problem solving. And I think the big problem here is that I don't really know what the problem is, what problem is driving my narrative at this point. There's lots of things I need to fit into my narrative, but I need kind of an overarching problem that's going to guide my whole writing for the rest of the chapter. So that's a bit of an issue. I really need to figure this out. I'm not sure I'm going to do it. One thing I've learned over the years in my own practice is that the best thing to do is to not stop. It's just to keep going in whatever way I can. And so I'm going to try to do that. I have been considering writing a timeline for my novel because my novel takes place over several years and there's lots of jumping around, and I really want to make sure that my timelines are correct. So that will be something that I'll consider doing maybe. But I mean, I've made some tentative moves towards trying to figure it out, trying to recast it. Basically, just do anything so that I can get out of this place of feeling like I don't know what to do. So I'll let you know how that works out for me next week. But right now, that is my situation. And yes, and I have finished. I'm happy to tell you that I finished Madame Bovary. I mean, it's a great book. It's wonderful. And the ending is more enjoyable than that middle section that I was having difficulty with. I believe in one of my earliest videos I mentioned that I was remembering too much of the book for it to be that enjoyable, and it turns out that I remembered a lot of the beginning of the book, but I actually didn't remember a lot of the end of the book, which is interesting. For instance, there's a minor yet really pivotal character that I completely forgot about, and it's this blind man with leprosy that keeps popping up at really horrible times. And he often comes up right in the moment when Madame Bovary is feeling most happy with her love. She's having another affair. Sorry, spoilers, I apologize for this. So she's having another affair, and he pops up, and he's this figure of horror, like very Freudian horror. He's blind, and once again, it's like that surgery that I mentioned in the last video. It kind of breaks the tone, this whole beautiful tone of amorous love, and he interrupts it and reminds you of death. So it was kind of strange to realize that I'd completely forgotten this character. It seems very key, and he becomes incredibly key towards the end of the book. And so that was really strange. And what I also, I mean, it is kind of, he's kind of a strange figure because I don't know really how to interpret him. I mean, the most basic way you could imagine interpreting him is as an example of foreshadowing, because, you know, I hope you do know that she dies in the end. Like, that's kind of a major part of the book. So I mean, the fact that he's telling her about death is foreshadowing. And but at the same time, I kind of hate that interpretation because I hate foreshadowing. This is what it made me think of. And I hate it because I hate how simplistic foreshadowing is. Like, foreshadowing is often like everyone's so happy and they're sitting on a, a park, sitting on a blanket in the park, and then someone cuts their finger, and that something terrible is going to happen later. And I hate it because it doesn't allow for a nuance of meaning. It always flattens everything down to everything will be horrible in the end, which I suppose for a tragedy is what it's supposed to be about. But at the same time, I really resist that. I hate the idea that the entire novel is simply building up just for that moment. I think that each moment should have kind of a weight and importance to it, and that the entire point of the novel shouldn't be, oh, she's going to die. So that's interesting. I really do kind of want to think of more about what he means aside from this foreshadowing thing, and I'm thinking more about how I want to avoid foreshadowing in my novel, and it'll be interesting how I manage to do that. Um, and it's very interesting too, the death scene. I'm sorry, once again, I'm just going to talk about the death scene. I'm not going to avoid it. Um, it's an amazing death scene, like incredibly, uh, incredibly detailed and um, like clinical almost. And Flaubert's father was a doctor, so there's definitely a lot of medical knowledge going into his description of her death. But there's also there's some great use of perspective and point of view that I hadn't really thought about before when I'd first read it. Um, like, because I've mentioned, the novel has been following Madame Bovary all the way through. Well, not necessarily all the time, but generally has been following her. And it will sometimes move out of her and move into other people and then move back. And he does it so fluidly. It's really, it really shows you how, um, I don't know, ham-fisted a lot of writers are when they do changes of point of view. Like he doesn't, you just don't even feel the changes. And so this death scene is one of those examples where it starts out from Madame Bovary's point of view, in that she's thinking about she poisons herself, and she's thinking about how the poison's acting upon her. She's seeing her husband, and then she starts to feel bad, like she starts to feel ill, and it's almost like at that moment that her point of view, like she vomits. It's almost like her point of view like leaves her, and from that point on, it really is focused on Charles Bovary's point of view, and we're kind of closed off, and we no longer know what her thoughts are as she's dying, which is really interesting. It does really create that feeling of, oh my God, I'm encountering death. This is what death is like. It's this great, like, emptiness that's just there that I want to enter, but I can't. So that is amazing. And the fact that he does it, I didn't even realize he did it until, like, I was like, oh, wait a minute, I have no idea what she's thinking at this point. And until I went back and actually saw where he had done it. And then he does a point where, right at the moment of her death, he jumps back into her, and with just enough time to give you the most horrifying, terrifying moment, in your, like, I was reading it, and I was like, this is like, this could scar you, and then leaves her finally and forever. And that I thought was incredibly effective. It was amazing, like how he does, like he kind of holds it back, and you're like, oh, this is just going to be naturalism, where you can't go into the head of a dead person, but just at the last minute he lets you back in. And so there's that, and there's also a lot of interesting use of sympathy. I mean, because this is a character who, in many ways, is horrible. Like, I mean, I really like the character. I love the novel, but she's kind of mean. She is kind of heartless to her husband. She doesn't have a lot of pity for people. She's very selfish. She doesn't really take care of her child. So she's not a very nice person. But so when she's dying, you might be wondering, oh, how can he possibly make this scene emotional? How can we make a scene with someone who's awful? How can we care about her death? And he gets around that in an interesting way that I'd never really paid attention to before. But once again, it's through Charles, her husband. Charles has always been, throughout this novel, like a particularly nice person, and you always kind of, like, he's a little bit dumb in terms of human interactions, but he's just kind of nice. And there's a moment when she's dying and she's in a lot of pain, and it says something like, Charles Bovary, looking at her in more pain than she was, said something. And And throughout the rest of that scene, you're aware of him suffering more than, like, I mean, it's kind of an exaggeration. How can he suffer more than someone who's dying? But in many ways, he could. Like, he is, that's such an empathetic character. He can empathize with this person who otherwise is like, you know, doesn't have anything to boast for her. And I think that's this is such a key thing, is that because he empathizes with her, she suddenly becomes a good person, a person we can care about, because we're kind of empathizing through Charles. And that's another reason why the perspective from him is so useful, because we are seeing it through his eyes, and he is such a sympathetic character that we can feel all these emotions about her death. And there's one moment where uh, she touches his hair and plays with his hair, and she'd always been really cold and to him and not very affectionate. And the fact that she does that to him makes him feel like, oh my God, maybe she's turning back into, or maybe she's finally showing the love that I've had for her. She's showing it back to me. And Flaubert says that made the fact that she was dying even worse. And so you can totally feel that tension. So it's, I mean, that's amazing, that just that creation of sympathy for someone who is dying, who is not necessarily the greatest character. And what I also liked about it too was that it's in many ways a description of reading. You know, reading is empathizing with the character, like entering into a character. And so Charles is in some ways like us with Madame Bovary. Like she is this character that does not care about us, and we have to find a way to emotionally connect with her. And it is, in many ways, Charles is a stand-in for the author, because he's, you know, I was reading the introduction and it talked about how Flaubert would often be crying and feel very upset when he was writing the scenes with Emma dying. And in many ways, he is like Charles, like watching his beloved, in this way, creation, dying, and after he spent so much time, you know, giving her life and everything like that. So it's very interesting too, like later on, what happens to Charles is very much like he's aimless and doesn't know what to do, and it's almost like the novel itself feels aimless. It's partially probably because Flaubert felt a little aimless. So lots of interesting things. I really love that last scene. It is kind of horrible. The ending is kind of really horrible. I'm kind of left with this feeling. There's one last moment of just beauty, and it was the moment that I cried. I cried when I was reading it. When none of the characters have really been, apart from Charles, has been really in love with Madame Bovary, but there's her father, who's like this really genuine and wonderful person. And at the end of the book, he comes too late to find his daughter, and the description of how he's traveling to her, to go to the town where she lives, and along the way he keeps imagining all the possibilities of what has happened, and he's like, oh no, she can't be dead. No, that can't be it. And once again, you know, because there's such a sympathetic character who is going through such turmoil based upon her death, we once again feel a lot of emotion, and I felt a lot of emotion. Pere Rolt, her father, is probably one of my favorite characters in the book. So it's amazing. It's beautiful. So yeah, I'm done. So I'm going to move on to another book that I'm going to read. And what I've decided was, I haven't. I started reading this, My Struggle, by Karl Ove Knausgaard, and I don't know if you've heard of it. He's a bit of an interesting Norwegian writer, It's written, I think this is a 7-volume series, which has the ironic title of My Struggle, which is the same title as Mein Kampf. But this one is kind of an autobiographical novel about his life. Really, it's really just like straight autobiography. And I read the first half, and I thought it was really interesting. There's lots of really interesting things about it. I also found it incredibly boring. And this was a struggle for me, so at one point I just put it down and never picked it up again. Uh, but I'm approximately halfway through, so I'm going to start it up again and finish reading it. And I hope that I can remember the beginning so that I don't have to start rereading it from the beginning. But I think I should be fine. And so that's what I'm going to read. And I might read some other stuff too, but that's mainly what I'm going to read. So this is kind of the end of, I was telling my students today, don't say kind of. So this is the end of my video. I want to thank you again for watching. And as I said, if you have any questions or comments, you can email me at the email address listed in the description box. I would be most happy to hear your responses. And as I said, I'm going to respond to those people who have already emailed me. I will. And I will let you know how my struggle with my writing goes. Hopefully it won't be much of a struggle. Hopefully I'll get out of it some way. And I'll see you next week. Okay, bye-bye.